I'm Crawford John Thomas. When I was 18, I met Edward D. Wood, Jr. We were both very young and idealistic and wanted to make movies. A fantastic medium where one can express himself and influence others in so many ways. You've probably heard many stories about Edward D. Wood, Jr., mostly out of perspective. I hope this version will illuminate the mind as to who and what Edward D. Wood, this most extraordinary man, was, whose story comprises, in many ways, the American dream.
Edward D. Wood, Jr.
To me, Edward Wood was the Orson Welles of low-budget pictures.
Hurt just for a moment, and then you will emerge a woman of super strength and beauty, the bride of the atom.
You're insane. My paper knows where I am. You can't hurt me and get away with it.
To me, Ed Wood was a user and a loser.
Ed Wood was the person that was completely undaunted. It didn't matter what reverses that he faced. He was childlike in his enthusiasm.
You're not going anyplace.
Ed Wood was the most sincere and honest person that I have ever met.
The transvestite is not interested in those of their own sex. The clothing is not worn to attract the attention of their own sex, but to eliminate themselves from being a member of that sex.
He was a great friend.
But last night I saw a flying object that couldn't have possibly been from this planet. But I can't say a word. I'm muzzled by army brass. I can't even admit I saw the thing.
Ed Wood was a very effusive, charming, lovable chap. But he was also a con artist.
He was like a dad to me.
And sometimes involved.
I mean, everybody was crazy about Ed. Everybody loved him. He was a real character, a sweet man. Except that he was self-destructive.
Ed Wood was a man who had high aspirations, did not reach all of them, but tried hard and loved his work.
I don't think Ed ever had the proper chance to show how really talented he was.
It's tough to find something when you don't know what you're looking for.
I don't think the lieutenant does either.
Then what are we doing out here? I was off duty an hour ago.
Oh, don't ask me any questions. I'm just a hard hand just like you.
Friend, my very best friend.
Edward Davis Wood Sr. was born 1895. Lillian Phillips was born 1903. They were married November 1923. Their firstborn son, called Junior, was born October 1924. His father worked at the post office, once helped President Roosevelt lay the cornerstone of the building. His mother was a buyer for the local department store. His childhood, by all accounts, was very normal. He would direct only 5 movies in his life, yet he is more famous now than other contemporary directors of his time. But who is this man, Edward D. Wood, Jr.? At 17, he won a medal from FDR for being the fastest typist in New York State. His senior year in high school, he would get his first movie camera and make little films. At the time of his death, he was writing about his youth and seeing Bela Lugosi in the movies. Now, for the first time, his words are read by Bela Lugosi Jr.
There is no doubt that I became enthralled with horror films in 1931 at the tender age of 7. Apparently because I have since written a great many short stories and several films of a horror nature, and directed a few. But from that first horror film, my young eyes were to see and my mind was to fathom Dracula, and the name of the man who created the role, Lugosi, remained permanently planted in a scope of horror which never has been duplicated. Destiny had designed the fact that Lugosi's and my trails would cross, and that crossing came a few short years after World War II, and I had left the Marine Corps to find whatever I might find in Hollywood. It's a very long way from Poughkeepsie, New York, and the Rialto Theater, where I saw Dracula in 1931, through 4 years of war and then to Hollywood. And who but the dark powers beyond could design our first film together? Like all powers, different types of powers were pulling toward that one entity, the meeting of myself and Lugosi.
I guess I'm pretty much of a lone wolf. I don't say I don't like people at all, but to tell you the truth, I only like them if I have a chance to look deep into their heart and in their mind. If I find there something worthwhile, some human kindness, some sympathy.
When I was born, the world was in 6 months of darkness. It was Lapland, Finland, 1922. But I didn't stay there very long. When I was about 2, my parents took me to the United States of America on one of those immigrant boats. And I sort of got to be a Depression child. The first films to which I was exposed were the silents. Oh, and for me, it was so exciting because the actors and actresses expressed such passion and sensuality. They gave vent to it all, and I fell madly in love with Theda Bara. She was such an erotic soul, and so a little bit sinister, but I thought so very beautiful. That's the kind of actress I wanted to be.
You're Hungarian, aren't you, Mr. Lugosi?
Yes, I am. What I mean, I'm Hungarian by birth. I'm an American now.
Well, why did you leave Hungary?
Political reasons. After the war, I participated in the revolution, and later, I found myself on the wrong side.
Well, what was your first mystery play?
It was Dracula.
Or did the role depress you?
Very much. It haunted me. I often dreamed of the dead. In the morning when I woke up, I was tired, depressed.
Oh, how frightfully weird.
It isn't so much a makeup. It's rather expression.
I'm afraid I'll dream about this myself tonight.
You flatter.
He was cast for the part of Count Dracula on the Broadway stage quite a few years before the 1931 Dracula movie released by Universal. And it was there that he created the mode of dress and the gestures and the whole presentation of the Count in the gentlemanly European manner that chilled and scared so many people of the time.
I am Dracula.
I got my first taste of film work when I was very young. Frank Capra chose me out of a group of children to be in a scene with Claudette Colbert and Clark Gable, and it happened one night. And it just intrigued me so much. The way they created the rain and everything behind the scenes was just something I could never get out of my mind. And I did want to pursue this.
In 1943, Mae West and Mike Todd were assembling the Russian army to appear in Catherine Was Great on Broadway. But as it developed, all the real men had gone to war. So they gathered up 60 pretty mama's boys to pose as said army, and those boys were competing with one another as to see who could stuff more Kleenex into his tights. But the important thing about that to me was that there was a little sideshow from midnight till 5 in the morning. We were rehearsing, the actors and actresses were rehearsing a show of their own. We were bringing the Grand Guignol to America, and we were doing this midnight spook show. I was cast as a vampire, oddly enough. And as the audience filled into the theater, I lay in a coffin in a semi-catatonic, maybe a pseudo-catatonic state, pretending to be a mannequin. But then I woke up and they said, she's alive. And it was such fun for me. I loved it. 45 minutes I lay there like as though I were dead. Just sort of like later on when I was in Plan 9 from Outer Space, I was dead again.
When I was very young, my father was killed in a tragic airplane accident, and we were forced to relocate in Hollywood. My mother bought a house on the corner of the old Vitagraph studio lot, and they had a movie set over there. It was a 300-foot high, half-mile long, intolerance set. And we used to like to go over there, and they'd chase us out of there, and they'd spank us if they caught us, and it was very exciting. I just loved that movie set. So I got the bug. I loved movies, and I used to walk around and watch them shooting movies. And all this was very close to where I met Edward D. Wood, Jr.
You know, even though, you know, Ed Wood would like to dress in women's clothes, I want to mention that he's very straight. In fact, when he was in the Marine Corps, he was on Tarawa, which was one of the islands in the Pacific. It was one of the fiercest battles in the Marine Corps history. 4,000 guys went in and 300 came out, one of which was Ed Wood's.
He came in on probably the last wave because the first 3 were wiped out. 1,000 were killed, they say, and 3,000 were injured in that battle. It was more than the American people was expected to take. It was a violent battle.
He did a lot of hand-to-hand on these invasions in some of these places. We had to do a lot of hand-to-hand combat. And the way we would do it, we were pretty big boys and very strong, so that we would, with our M1s and our bayonet, we would hit the Japanese bayonet, and the power of our weight and strength, we would knock the bayonet, they would drop it. And as we do that with our right hand, we would come up with the butt and hit him in the teeth. Now, in the case of Ed one time, he missed, and the Japanese did the same thing, except they hit him in the mouth, and he took some of his teeth out.
And Ed got so, mad about it that he just kept stabbing and stabbing him. He was so upset,
He had his battle fatigues, but under the battle fatigues, he had red panties and a red bra. underneath his outfit. And he hoped to hell that he got killed because he got wounded. He could never explain when they took his clothes off why he's wearing a red bra and the panties.
Maybe it made him feel good, I don't know. But if he ever got caught by another Marine, they probably would have killed him.
Just before I met Edward Wood, I was living in Monterey Park with Mona McKinnon. We read the trades and saw this call for Edward Wood looking for actresses for a film that he was preparing. When we went to Eddie's office, it was a little place that he rented in a studio, a very small office. And I couldn't believe when I looked at him, such a handsome young producer. I looked in his big baby blue eyes and wow, he was so very handsome. Before long, he was giving me the old cliche, I'm gonna make you a star. Well, of course, I didn't believe it. But I thought, well, gee, maybe I will get a break. This might be a nice break for me. And very soon we were going steadily together.
Well, I'd gone to the Bal Caribe at the Moulin Rouge in my Charles Adams costume, trying to get discovered by a producer, a television producer. Well, I did get discovered by a television producer. It was Hunt Stromberg Jr., but he wanted me alone. He didn't want the entire family, and I said, well, how are we going to do this? He said, we're not going to tell Charles Adams. I said, I can't do that, but give me a few days. And I came back to him with the character Vampira, which my then husband had named. I had added from a B&D magazine, a bondage and discipline magazine at the time, I had taken a waist cincher and an uplift bra and fishnet hose, and I'd slit my dress, and I wore a pant leather belt, and I had a foot-long cigarette holder and long red fingernails, hemorrhage red. And so I added sex, you know, to the death. I thought that's a good combination, sex and death. Hunt was delighted, and they put me on the air.
The play that we were doing at the old Gateway Theater was a melodrama, very much like The Drunkard, called The Blackguard Returns. People were furnished beer and pretzels in the audience, and they would hiss when the villain came in and boo and participate with the show, and it was a rowdy bunch, but it was fun.
Well, I met Ed Wood after I had attended the Blackguard Returns, and I went down there. I was very enamored by it. The villain would come out and say, aha, yonder in the gold mine sits young Willie Mason. Little does he know that on the morrow, I, Duke Dalton, will become sole possessor of his wealth. And the villain would then say, end his life, and he would kill off the little Willie Mason in the mine. And I liked that part, and I was 18 then, and I said, I want that part, and there was an opening for it, and it was a paying role. And I practiced for the part, went down and got the part, much to the consternation of my parents. They didn't want me into acting. And I met Edward G. Woods there, who played the sheriff. And Ed and I, we got together and involved ourselves in making a movie. We rented a suite of offices in the old Monogram building next to the Vista Theater on the site of the Intolerance set where I used to play as a kid. There we dreamed of making great epics like D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. And we wanted to do commercials at first. And we knew the market was right about then. It was 1948 when TV was just beginning. And there was a big market for this new medium.
Oh, yes. This was the days of early television, and it was like anything goes. We were all improvisational. There were no guidelines, really. Late at night, too, they didn't care what we were doing. But sometimes I wouldn't get my script until 15 minutes before airtime, and the director would start walking me through my marks, say, oops, we gotta go now, boom, and we're on camera, and the teleprompter is directly above the lens, and if anything went wrong with that teleprompter, I was stuck because I didn't know how to improvise. I was still afraid of the camera. Well, afraid to some degree. Sometimes I'd look deep into it as though it were the eyes of a lover, and I'd look down inside its soul, and I'd silently say during one of my verbal silences, "You son of a bitch, I've got you. I've got you." Once I felt I had reached the soul, I was hypnotizing people. And then it turned out that they were writing in the newspaper columns, "People are watching the Vampira show, they're hypnotized." They didn't know they really were hypnotized. We opened the show with a scream. I'd come down the corridor through a mist-filled corridor. And when I finally arrived with the camera, the Vampira arrived with the camera, she would unexpectedly scream a blood-curdling scream. And then say, "Screaming relaxes me so." Well, apparently I was instantly a sensation. Even Life magazine came and photographed me. 5 pages in Life. We'd been on the air only 3 weeks when they came, and had fan clubs all over the world, was nominated for an Emmy for the most outstanding new personality of the year. And almost immediately afterward, I was blacklisted and never worked again, except once for Liberace.
I came to Hollywood in the year of 1948. I was only here approximately about a couple of months, and I run into Ed Wood. In fact, I met him right in Hollywood. Down the street from Monogram Pictures. There was a little cafe there. In fact, there was a movie house there at the corner called the Vista Theater. And Ed Wood lived above there. In fact, there was his office up there. It was a combination living there and also up there, hopefully to produce films in the near future, so he had to have a front. So he had a combination of living quarters as well as an office. So I met Ed Wood, just a coffee shop, and from day one, became good friends. I told my brother Henry about Ed Wood that evening. I says, guess who I met? I met a movie director. His name was Edward D. Wood, Jr. So he invited us over to his place that evening. So my brother and I went over there. Ed was telling us about a movie that he just recently finished. I was under the impression that it was a complete movie, it was ready for release. And he was telling us that the title of the film was called Crossroads of Laredo. And he was all excited about it. This was a big thrill for him. He told us the producer's name, Mr. Crawford Thomas. He'd go around for days just humming this song, you know, Streets of Laredo. He's so excited. And so it kind of made us feel good that, we met a movie producer.
And we shot this western Crossroads of Laredo out in Saugus at the old Iverson Ranch, and then at another site across the street from the Hollywood Bowl. That's Ed Wood on the horse there. We shot this film in 2 days on an Army surplus film, and Ed Wood starred in a cameo role. Everything was shot in one take. As you can see, we had problems with the camera-conscious horses. So we took the horses out. Don Nagel as the villain. Our film had saloon girls, shootouts, everything that was characteristic of a good Western. Ray Flynn, who was the second unit cameraman on Gone with the Wind, photographed the major sequences. Ed Wood did the others. We needed a coffin, so Ed Wood quickly formed one out of cardboard boxes and gummed shipping tape. Then he painted it black. Ray Flynn then threw some water on it to make it look real and give it some sheen. He wasn't the businessman that he could have been. Ed and I at one point, though, parted. And it was very disappointing to me, and it was very depressing. Things didn't work out, but there was this movie, which I've had for 46 years.
So we happened to mention it to Ed Wood that we're going to do a little home movie. So Ed must have got the impression that we had money. So no, it's just a little home movie, our own personal use. You know, we don't go back home and show everybody we made a Western out in Hollywood. And Ed said, well, I'll do it for you guys. And, you know, right away, my brother and I said, well, hell, he just finished the movie. You know, we can't afford this man.
It was a very good experience, taught me a lot of life's lessons, but it did bring me to the brink of suicide after it was all over with. And I was sitting there musing one day, debating whether to do it or not, and I was thinking of Hamlet's line in Shakespeare, to be or not to be, that is the question, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or by opposing end them, to die, to sleep. And then I thought about this sleep. Well, what if I awaken to hellfire and eternal oblivion? The idea of awakening to oblivion didn't appeal to me. I didn't know what was going to happen. It scared me. You know, I decided to endure the outrageous slings and arrows of fortune.
So Ed said, look, I'll do it real cheap for you. I'll be your cameraman. And my brother said, well, I want to be the director. Okay, so that was settled. My brother had a little script, simple little script. So anyway, we got this, we set up a date. We're going to shoot the movie. We went out on location in Griffith Park. So, as I remember, the first day was only a one-day shoot, and that was it, about a 5-minute Western supposed to be. So we're out there on location, and my brother told Ed the way he wanted to set this shot, you know, a master shot, a long shot. And Ed would say, no, no, no. He says, you got to do it. It's a medium shot. Right away, he started taking over. So my brother said, okay, #1 shot, no problem. So the next setup we're supposed to do, my brother said, we're coming in for a medium shot. Ed would say, no, it's going to be a close-up. So he was having a problem right there with Ed Wood, messing up our little picture, a 5-minute movie. Well, we had to pay Ed $60. But he rushed the job for us. You know, I mean, we wanted to take our time and do it right. After all, nobody was getting paid. So with Ed Wood, he rushed the job and so forth, and it was all Ed Wood's, it was his whole picture. Ed took over the reins, did the whole thing himself.
I'll tell you, I started in show business in 1919. I was 17 years old, and I had been an amateur magician, which was probably one of the reasons I got started. I am 92 years old. Yes, I am. I was doing a picture at Universal. I think it was called Chinatown Squad, and there was a third assistant on the picture, as I remember. We called them sort of gophers because they had to go for the actor. If he was in his dressing room, go for coffee or whatever he wanted him to go for. And this was a guy by the name of Eddie Wood. He said, you know, you're one of my favorite actors. I mean, he says, you're just great. I learned later on from Bela Lugosi that he had said the same thing to him. He had said the same thing to Herbert Rawlinson, and everybody was his favorite actor.
Eddie heard that George Weiss was going to be doing a movie about Christine Jorgensen, and then he heard that he could not get rights to her story. So Eddie did something very brave, which I didn't find out about till later. He said, I'm the most capable writer, director of this type of movie because I've lived it.
And he told me right there and then he's doing a picture in a couple of weeks, which was called Glen or Glenda, and he says, Connie, you're going to appear in it.
I don't think George Weiss realized what it was all going to be about, and neither did I. But Eddie did use the story of our life together. But you see, Eddie hid it from me all the time. Except for the Angora sweater that he would wear, I didn't know to the full extent of him being a transvestite.
When I went to meet George Weiss, the producer of the show, he started telling me about this man that transforming him into a woman, see? So, of course, I was in his office, and I looked around, and I saw all these Girl Gang and The Devil Sleeps, all these weird titles. And I got a little leery, you know, for a moment, what kind of pictures were going to be. So then we mentioned about Bela Lugosi being in the film, and I said, my God, it's my idol. said, well, if he's got Lugosi, and this is my first picture for Ed Wood, I says, well, I was all excited.
Ed Wood was an odd fellow. He drank too much. He crossed my father's path at the end of my father's life, the last few years. And my dad at the time was desperate for the dignity of work, needed money, and Ed Wood filmed him in his films, and I think dragged him down to the level of the Ed Wood films and what they're infamous for.
I'm a young punk, maybe 23, 24 years old at that time, and here I'm working with the great master. And I was fighting the fact of, am I doing it right by the man? Am I doing right by the film? We sat in the bar, the Harvey, one night, and he said to me, I didn't like you. I didn't like you at all. You're no good. And he says, but now I think I like you better than Alex Gordon.
Startling, because they seem new, sudden. But most are not new to the signs of the ages.
He turned to me and he says, Harry, what am I doing here? I says, Mr. Lugosi, you're making a picture. What kind of picture? I said, science fiction, you know, the general type of picture that sells and you like to do. But I don't have a script. I says, Mr. Lugosi, don't worry about that. Nobody has. And he chuckled. So I continued cutting his hair.
He only showed me the portion of the script that I was in, so I didn't really know the full story.
Quite honestly, I worked for him because I needed the money, you know.
I think that Eddie was trying to make a statement in Glen or Glenda. It was a very courageous statement in those days. He was trying to have people realize a more tolerant attitude toward transvestites.
Those fingernails have got to go.
You know, I didn't realize they're as long as they are.
My goodness, they're almost as long as mine. Maybe even prettier. We'll have to paint them sometime just for the fun of it.
He wanted to look like himself and be identified. And I wanted to marry him very attractive. I had a wig that flattered his face. Besides, the wig was beautiful. But he says, no, I don't want to look pretty. I don't want to look like something I'm not. I want to look like Ed Wood. I'm a transvestite. That's my life story. Do it.
Give this man satin undies, a dress, a sweater, and a skirt, or even the lounging outfit he has on, and he's the happiest individual in the world.
One time he really got wiped out, and I had to get him home. But he was wearing his Shirley outfit, and Shirley outfit is a horrible Silver LeMay dress like in the 50s or the 40s. And he wore these white shoes that were dirty, and they were all crooked. And because he's a guy, he couldn't walk straight, so he'd walk like a guy, you know, only he looks like he's got a dress like a woman. And then he had this terrible cheap wig, and he would put his makeup on around his eyes like this when he had the wig on. But then when he got drunk, the wig would come off, and then you see all the white skin and where he didn't have makeup. It was hideous. So I had to get him home, and I lived on Fair in North Hollywood. Couldn't find the number. And I had a Jeep, and I'm driving a Jeep around, and I see these young 14-year-old girls, and very sweet little girls, and they're walking down the street. And I figured I'll ask them where the number is, but I didn't really realize what Ed looked like. I forgot, next to me. So I pulled up to the girls, and I said, pardon me, and I gave them a number on Fair. And they're very sweet, and they look around, they see Ed sitting there, and they screamed and ran away down the block.
The picture was kind of sentimental. It had pathos of, well, will I be accepted?
If the Creator had meant us to be boys, we certainly would have been born boys.
If the Creator had meant us to be born girls, we certainly would have been born girls.
Are we sure? Nature makes mistakes. It's proven every day. This person is a transvestite, a man who is more comfortable wearing girls' clothes.
I wasn't allowed on the set when he dressed like a woman, in the wig and everything, and I didn't find out till later. The picture wasn't premiered till much later.
I think that he took advantage of my father's need for desire to work and need for money, and put him in roles which today are I think, pretty near the bottom of the barrel. And I don't even like to see those movies. I won't go see them.
When I went to the premiere, which was released months later, and saw Eddie in his women's clothes, the wig and the dress and everything, I was very embarrassed.
Anyway, we saw the picture, and it was all right. I mean, you know.
And here I was with a room full of people. Oh, it was embarrassing. I wanted to crawl in a hole somewhere.
The end is only the beginning. Time passes. Soon, due to a happily married life, the remembrance of the psychiatric treatments, and Barbara's love and understanding, Glenda begins to disappear forever from Glenn. Glenn has found his mother, his little sister, his wife, and his Glenda all in one lovely package. Thus, Glenn's case has a happy conclusion.
Well, I said, how could you do that? How could you put our life on the screen? You know, and I guess he just got drunk and didn't want to face me with it.
He's pretty loaded by the time we have a few more drinks after the picture.
You're referring to the suicide of the transvestite?
If that's the word you men of medical science use for a man who wears woman's clothing, yes.
And it winds up that I'm delegated to take him back to his place in Hollywood. So we start out, and we get to Hollywood, and I said, now where do you, I had no idea where he lived, and he couldn't tell me and all that sort of thing.
My mind's in a muddle, like in a thick fog. I can't make sense to myself sometimes.
So by the time I got to my place, he's out, and I can't get him up, and I'm tired and everything else, so I go on upstairs and go to bed. About 2 in the morning, there's a rap on the door, and I finally get out of bed and go to, and it's Eddie. And he said, "You got to get me home." Of course, he's still, you know, hungover and everything like that. And I said, "Well, I can't take you home at this time. I mean, it's, you know, it's 2 in the morning." I said, "What do you mean?
I thought I could stop wearing these things. I tried, honestly, I tried. I haven't had a stitch of them on for nearly 2 weeks until tonight."
My wife hears this. Now, she's never met him. And she said, "Well, let him take our, we'll go in with the kids." I said, well, anyway, that was decided. So we give him our room. Anyway, about 8 o'clock in the morning, we're having breakfast, the 2 kids.
Let me see a nightie.
Oh, well, what size?
12.
The color, the material?
Black and very sheer.
Just a minute. You can see how sheer the material really is.
Yes.
You see, it's all pure nylon and only $21.95. And of course, it will never snag.
And out of bedroom comes Eddie, and he's got my wife's silk, or her very flimsy, she was quite short, and it got this on with a bra. Well, I didn't know that he was a transvestite, and the kids, of course, they didn't know whether this was a gag or, you know, I mean, what did they know? And Paula had never seen him before even, you know, she knew it was Eddie Wood. Well, but the only thing my reaction was only one of great fury, anger. And I said, "Get back in there and get out of here. You got to get out of here." So he goes back in the room, puts his clothes on, and he says, well, I got to get back into town. I said, no, get in any way you want to. So I shoved him out the front door, and that was the last that I saw of him.
He had a mother who dressed him up like that. I could see where he gained acceptance, so that's probably one of the sources of that drive.
I'm not a cross-dresser, but I respect the feelings of quality and softness that femininity naturally has.
Ed was not gay, and I never knew him to be like that. He was strictly a man's man, except for this funny thing with the women's clothes.
Well, I just had tried to be as understanding as I could.
I don't fully understand this, but maybe together we can work it out.
Because I did care a lot for him. He was so creative and talented, and I enjoyed working with him. I loved him, but I couldn't take the whole, I couldn't take the dressing like a woman.
He wasn't gay. I can tell you that right now. First time I found out that he was a transvestite, he was spending the night at my house, and he asked me if he could borrow my nightgown, and I said absolutely not. I always hated that about Eddie, that he liked to do that.
Wood was this way. He didn't care what people thought. He did have sensitivities, and he had emotions. And I was on his side all the way.
He was a very straight guy. He loved women. In fact, he was a womanizer. And womanizers who are transvestites because they love women so much, they want to be like next to them. Not like them, but next to them. But he was very straight.
Well, he was prone to pretty things, feminine things, because a transvestite or a cross-dresser is not a homosexual. He's not a gay person. These people not to be confused with the other. He liked girls. He liked women. He liked the nurturing and the warmth a woman would give, a girl would give.
I believe his mother wanted a girl, and she dressed him in girls' clothing till he was quite older. I don't know how old, but during his youth, he was dressed in girls' clothing. Then she put him in a bunting outfit lined with rabbit fur, which is Angora. And he said he never forgot the sensation of that next to his body. And I guess that's where he got his Angora fetish.
People so often ask me if Ed Wood directed Plan 9 from Outer Space wearing an Angora sweater. Well, of course he didn't. He did that when he was playing the lady who wore the Angora sweater and he was in front of the camera. He wasn't going to change clothes in order to run around in back of the camera. So that film, Glen or Glenda, I guess he did sometimes direct in an Angora sweater. But Plan 9, he wore a sport jacket, a shirt and a tie, or sometimes an ascot, and he directed with a megaphone. And he was romantic and beautiful. And I thought that the megaphone was a lovely touch, although at the time it was obsolete, but he wore it well.
I was there when he needed me. I kept Eddie well fed. I bought him nice suits for his film meetings. I kept him healthy and off the bottle for 3 years. I was able to promote the entire women's wardrobe for Eddie's first 3 films. We also worked together scouting locations. We talked the police department into using their building, their booking desk, and even their police cars. This is the way Eddie brought his pictures in reasonably.
Had he had the money and the time, today Wood would have been amongst the famous.
Mike! Give me a mic!
Thank you. How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? This is Orson Welles.
Eddie idolized Orson Welles. He would go to see his movies over and over, and he had a lot of problems to overcome too, but never the problems that Eddie had.
You're kidding. My God, I can't believe that. He wanted to be Orson Welles? Well, a good chance. My God.
Ed, I think, you know, everyone starts out learning, and he never got much beyond that stage to me.
Well, like my brother Henry would always say, he'll improve. Each picture he made, it always gets better, it'll get better.
Orson Welles, well, he was the only man that I dated in various cities around America, because I'm not much of a traveler. But I was, my first encounters with Orson were in New York when he was separated from Rita. Then he went back with Rita, and after he was divorcing her, he found me in San Francisco and again in Los Angeles. So that was quite a running relationship. But the first time that Orson saw me scantily clad in a boudoir, he said, "Magnificent carcass." I thought, what? Magnificent carcass indeed, in that marvelous voice of his. That's about all I have to say. I don't want to talk about his giving me clap or anything.
What about
Bob, why don't you do your shaving at home? Well, I'm at home long enough to do it. You got a point there. There he was, Inspector. Right in our hands. We didn't get him. And I think the doctor was only doing what he thought was right. You gonna bring him in?
Well, Steve Reeves, this was his first movie, and he was Mr. Universe, Mr. America. And I can remember how we got to be good friends sitting there waiting between the sets. We'd sit there, and he was a health nut too, and so he'd eat his fruit and nuts and talk about health and everything. And I had a love scene coming up with him where it was a smooching scene, and we were supposed to have a very warm kiss. And I was kind of looking forward to melting into that. And he wouldn't give it back. It would have turned out a lot better if he'd helped me.
Hello, Miss Gregor.
Oh, Lieutenant Lawrence.
I just thought I'd drop by. Have you heard from Don?
We'd have called you if we had.
Well, do you mind if I stop in a minute?
As a matter of fact, I do mind. I have to go out, and I'm already late.
Well, that's too bad. I thought I could be of some help.
Help? By involving my father in this?
Miss Gregor, if you just stop to realize, you'd see that it wasn't the police that's involving your father.
Good night, Lieutenant Lawrence.
People don't seem to understand that people out there in the audience do not want to think, they want to be entertained. They want to, this. That's the success of a picture. And Jailbait, I remember, the gimmick in that is at the end when he was accused of something and he wanted his face done over, which we did, and it gave the picture away.
On time, Doc?
You appear to be a man who is usually on time.
You got it right, Doc. Let's get these Christmas wrappings off and see the presents you gave me. Keep your eye on them, honey.
There. It is done.
Perhaps you'd better take a look yourself first.
No! This is my son. The man who killed the policeman. No!
Well, I met Ed Wood by my own PR man. He says, "You got to meet this guy. He's full of a lot of pep and energy. You remind me of him." He says, "You guys are make a big pair." So he did, and just what he said happened. And he was raising money for Bride of the Monster. So Marge Usher, my agent, got the money for Bride of the Monster, and they were happy. Everything was great, but they said, "Where's Paul? What is he gonna do?" He said, "What?" You know, he says, "Well, we got a Irish cop." He said, "Oh, no, I got to do more than that." I said, "Well, I'll do the next picture with you." So he said, "Well, maybe let's think of the names." So everybody walked around and thinking, and Marge says, "Kelton." And I said, "Kelton? Where'd you get that at?" He said, "I live in West Los Angeles on Kelton Avenue." Well, Ed went, "Oh, man, you are Kelton." And that's how I became Kelton the Cop.
After Glenn or Glenda, Eddie knuckled down to write a picture that he said was specially for me and really was going to make me a star. In fact, this picture had more of a budget than any picture that he had ever made. And I liked the part. It was it allowed you to show a lot of emotion and acting ability. So I was really looking forward to doing Bride of the Monster, and I loved working with Bela, who we had become good friends.
Just before I met Ed Wood, I was doing a play at the Coronet Theater, and there were two lady agents apparently in the audience. They came backstage to see me and said they wanted to sign me, that they thought they had something for me almost right away. So we made an appointment, and I went to their office. They spoke to me, and they said they wanted me to meet Ed Wood that afternoon. So it was a short interval in between. They said, "By the way, do you happen to have an Angora sweater?"
Now we're ready for the girl.
When the script to Bride of the Monster was finished, Eddie started to try to get the financing for it. And he hadn't had any luck. And then we heard about a young lady who had inherited some money and was interested in films. So we met with Loretta King.
Ed Wood never asked me for money. He never even referred in any way to it. As a matter of fact, when they stopped production, I wasn't even told it was because he didn't have any money. I was just told that they were going on hiatus for a certain length of time and that they would call me. And he did. He called me in Arizona. And he didn't say, "We have the money, we can get started." He just said, "We're starting to shoot at 6:30 on Monday morning." So I couldn't be more astounded. I don't know where anybody could get the idea that I came up with the money, because I didn't.
And she and Eddie got to talking, and she said she was interested in financing it. And then she came to my part and says, "Oh, I like this part." So Eddie gave her the part to get the picture done, but I couldn't believe that he would do that after all we'd been through. And he wanted to marry me and everything. Why would he do that to me after he wrote this very nice part for me?
And it was never approached in any way. And so it was all a shock when about 20 years later I hear this. So naturally I was astounded by it.
So I was so angry. I was furious. And he kept saying, "Well, I'll write you another script, a better one next time." But I never really believed in him after that.
There was a scene in the newspaper office, and I was supposed to meet her. She was a girl that worked there also, and I was a newspaper reporter. And we met in the hall and spoke about, I think that I was supposed to go up to this haunted house, and we discussed that for a few minutes, and that was about all. Now, it was, I think, before the premiere that at 4 o'clock in the morning I received a call, and it awakened me out of a sound sleep, and my mother. And this voice said, "How do you like doing what is mine?" And I said, "Who is this?" So, "How do you like having what I'm supposed to have?" I said, "Dolores?" She said, "Yes, this is me." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" She says, "You're doing my role." I said, "Well, Dolores, I had no idea." I said, "I received that role through my agents, and that's when I met Ed Wood." Then she became quite nice, and she was understanding. And I never mentioned this to Ed Wood. Never. Not to anybody on the set. No one knew it.
Hi, Janet. Oh, hi, Marge. Janet, still on the monster hunt? What do you think? I think the boss has been looking for you all day. Something about the police wanting those monster stories 86. You've got the whole town in a panic. I didn't hear you. I said I know what you said, but I didn't hear you. I get it. See you later.
There were so many different stories that were around, like that I didn't like fluids. Well, I didn't drink, not alcohol. I love water and iced tea. And Ed would never approach me for money. And that made me very angry when I heard that. And every story that came out, well, it just seems like Rashomon all over again.
When we were doing the shots over in up at Elysian Park, Bela says, "Can you take me to my apartment? And let me ask Eddie, you know." And so he asked Eddie if he could take him. He said, "No, you can't. I need him here." Bela said, "I need him more." So I drove him down to the apartment and saw him with his ritual of taking some shots.
The last few years of his life became medically addicted to a painkiller because of the injuries to his leg. And at age 72, he committed himself for drug treatment and rehabilitation, and he was successfully cured. So he, at all times through his life, showed a great deal of courage.
Bela was so great, and he said to me when we were doing one scene, and just between when they were setting up, he said, "I really like you. You give an actor so much. You look right in their eyes."
Home. I have no home. Hunted. Despised. Living like an animal. The jungle is my home. That I will show the world that I can be its master. I will perfect my own race of people. A race of atomic supermen which will conquer the world.
And at the end of it, he comes out and he says, "Feel better, Polly. Let's go back to work." So we went back to work, and for the next 4 or 5 hours, it was Bela in a little lake here. Poor guy freezing with this octopus that was all broken, and everyone's trying to do it. And he gets the darn things and put them over him. Bela does it like that. So everybody's trying to keep from laughing, you know, because it was, mechanically, it didn't work.
After Bride of the Monster, I was looking for an opportunity to get away, and it came up on a very good job that only lasted for 2 weeks. But once I saw New York, I knew that I had to go back. There were so many opportunities there for me. And so I packed up and moved to New York and left Eddie. But before that, I can remember a scene where in the Burbank house off of Magnolia Boulevard, I guess he'd had several drinks and he was outside of the house. The whole neighborhood could hear him crying, "I love you, please let me in." And it was over. It was over. When I was living in New York, I was writing songs and Hal Wallace came into town. He was an old friend of mine from the studio days in Hollywood. We went out to dinner, and then I interested him in the songs I'd been writing, because everything I wrote I would take to a publisher and they'd give me a nice advance. When he heard my songs, he looked at me and says, "Dolores, why do you want to be an actress when you can write like this?" I said, "Oh, come on, Hal, I want to go to Hawaii with Elvis. Don't give me this." And he says, "You know, you can't be an ingenue forever. And songwriting's a much more rewarding career." And he says, "And I want you tomorrow morning to be at the Brill Building at 1619 Broadway and meet Freddie Beanstalk, who does all of Elvis's publishing." So I was there bright and early, and they put me with Ben Weissman. Ben Weissman has had 58 Elvis Presley hit songs, and he had a lot of them before we started writing together. But my first song for Hal Wallace was "Rockahula Baby" in the Blue Hawaii Picture, which was a big hit. And it was on the charts for 6 months. I wrote about 14 songs for Elvis. His very last picture was "Change of Habit," and the song that he sings to the little girl on the merry-go-round, a wonderful production, was "Have a Happy."
I read about that cemetery business. I tried to get you kids not to buy too near one of those things. We get there soon enough as it is.
He thought it'd be quiet and peaceful there.
No doubt about that. It's quiet all right, like a tomb. I'm sorry, Jeff, that was a bad joke.
I was on location one day out at one of the ranches, and Ed came out looking for locations, and he gave us all, he said, "Would you like to take a ride?" So we all got in the car. He had a nice convertible then, just boomeranged from there on. We decided to get married, and within like 2 days, he had it all arranged, for heaven's sakes.
He said, "Paul, I'm getting married." I said, "What?" He said, "I'm getting married. Help me. Get on the phone and invite people over." I said, "What?" I wanted to talk to me. He says, "I'm getting married." And so I got on the phone. I was very social in those days. Went through my book, invited everybody I could think of. And everybody bought something like, like candy and stuff like that, made up punch. This all had to be done in a matter of a couple of hours,
And it was a very nice wedding, and Bela Lugosi stood up with him. It was so fast, I didn't ask a lot of people, but you should have seen the people that was there. He just had a lot of friends, Ed was really well liked. Well, we lived together, I guess about 6, 7 weeks. And Bela Lugosi called me one night and told me that Ed was drinking too much down there, and would I come and get him? "Nora, Ma, would you come and pick up Eddie?" And I said, "Why?" That's when he told me he was drinking. I asked him why in the world he would go out and drink too much, what was the problem? He said, "I'm a transvestite." And I said, "Well, what's that?" He says, "I like to work in women's clothing." I said, "I can't live with you." So the next day, I said, "I have to move." So I went to my mother's house, and I came back a few days later and moved my things out. And I had discovered that he had worn a dress of mine, and so I left that for him. I said, "You can have this dress, you've ruined it." So you can just imagine how I felt, though.
And, in fact, it was later when I was about, I guess, 10 or 11, somewhere in there, that he wrote a script for my dummy and I. We went to Bella's house when I was about 5 years old. Bella answered the door for us when we rang. We were there for dinner. And when he answered the door, I looked up and it was Dracula. And so I was frightened, and I didn't say anything to my mother, but when we got inside, she must have known, because she asked Bella to take me around the house and show me the place. And so I thought I was off with Dracula. And as soon as you entered, there was a huge picture of him.
And being 5 years old, and Michael being afraid of, scary pictures and things like that.
When we got to the top of the stairs, I looked down both ways, and it looked like really huge, and big doors and all kinds of empty rooms and dimly lit, and it was really frightening. So I ran down the stairs and into the kitchen to my mother, and she was in the kitchen with Dracula's wife. And so she was kind of small, and she had this step stool, and I crawled up on the step stool to see what was for dinner. She was cooking something on the stove in a big pot, and I looked in and it was fish head soup. There were eyes looking at me, and it was really terrifying. I didn't like many things anyway, and fish head soup definitely wasn't something I liked. So I didn't eat much that night at dinner.
Toward the end of 1954, I was invited to a socio-professional function at the apartment of Forrest J. Ackerman. And it was a birthday party for Bela Lugosi Jr. It was his 16th birthday, and there I met for the first time Mr. Edward D. Wood Jr. And while he didn't actually ask me at that time if I would work for him, I did encounter him in a small room with a few people, and I thought, this is a pathetic buffoon. You know, he's a man who doesn't even know his own shortcomings. Kind of sad. Pretty, but ineffectual and tragic. I dismissed him from my mind. Well, about a year later, I read a column in the old Los Angeles Mirror that said the same Edward D. Wood was preparing a production, and he was making Z films. I mean, less than a nickel they were costing. And finally, I had reached a point for the first time in my life where the major studios wanted me. 3 of them were bidding, and they were going to build a production around me, and oh, it was an unbelievable thing for me. I had finally arrived after endless struggle, and this man said that he had planned to have or hoped to have Vampira in his production. I thought, he wants to grab a hold of my heels and pull me back down into the, you know, nickels and dimes mire from which I had clawed my way up, and I was incensed. I thought, I wouldn't work for that idiot. How dare he to aspire to me, right?
Greater love hath no man than to lay down his life for another. It is always difficult to have last words over the grave of a friend. And Inspector Daniel Clay was a friend, a dear friend to me and to all of us.
It was in 1956. While I was pastor of a small church in La Crescenta, California, that I became acquainted with the gentleman. He was a fellow worker in the churches of my area and of my faith, and was a singer, and I used him in some meetings that I had in my church, and he did me a good job.
My wife and I were attending the First Baptist Church of Beverly Hills, and there was a little man there named Ed Reynolds, little chubby, delightful fellow who had come out from Alabama to make biblical movies. He had seen C.B. DeMille's 10 Commandments, and he was very impressed with it, and he felt called of God to come to the West Coast and make biblical epics.
Reynolds was an ex-alcoholic, and he was trying to convert Ed Wood, and, you know, from drinking, and try to get him to join the church. And Ed, being so enthused about making a movie, had this script, Grave Robbers, and so Reynolds showed a lot of interest, and he got Reynolds interested possibly going to the church and talk to the people with, you know, back him up for that movie. And Reynolds told him, says, if you let me convert you and you come over to the church, he says, you know, you'll meet a lot of nice people over there. And it's not only I'll get converted, I'll get my people, all my friends.
He was even baptized. He even made what they call a profession of faith. And I was there the night that Edward was baptized. He was resplendent in a white robe and immersed in the pool of the church and looking like an angel. Tor Johnson was one of these dear, dear persons, and he was sincere about his faith and desire to be religious.
Greta didn't like the idea. That was his wife. But Tor was willing to go along with it. Because Tor felt, you know, he's going to get some good money out of this picture deal, which he did. Tor did very good for himself.
But he was too large. He was 400 pounds, just would not fit in the baptistry. So the pastor of the church talked one of his ladies into letting the church use her swimming pool as a place of baptism. And one Sunday afternoon after church, on a beautiful, lovely day, about half the congregation showed up around the swimming pool in Beverly Hills, and Tor Johnson and about 7 or 8 of Ed Wood's entourage were duly baptized in the shallow end of a kidney-shaped pool. Tor Johnson was, humongous man, about 400 pounds, and the minister was quite small, and he couldn't get Tor's body submerged beneath the water. So Tor, being cooperative, laid back in repose and floated while the preacher, with all dignity and finesse gone, literally pushed his body under the water, and Tor came up in a few moments, sputtering like a walrus, and it was kind of clever, cute. Ed Wood got Ed Reynolds interested in making this film. Ed Reynolds told him of his aspirations to make biblical films, and Ed Wood convinced him that he should make exploitation type films first so that he could build up his capital, then make biblical pictures which required more budget and costumes and sets and locations. And Ed Reynolds bought the idea. It seemed reasonable.
I thought it did. Don't like hearing noises, especially when there ain't supposed to be any. Yeah, sort of spooky-like. Maybe we're getting old. Whatever it is, it's gone now. That's the best thing for us, too. Gone. Yeah, let's go.
The idea was that he wanted to produce the Billy Sunday story and claimed that he had the manuscript of Billy Sunday's life and had been given permission by Moss Sunday to make it into a movie.
I am the sworn, eternal, uncompromising enemy of the liquor traffic. I ask no quarter and I give none. I'll kick it as long as I have a foot. I'll punch it as long as I have a fist. I'll butt it as long as I have a head. I'll bite it as long as I have a tooth. And when I'm old and fistless and footless and toothless, I'll gum it till I go home to heaven and it goes home, my friend, to hell.
And the idea was that we would sell Grave Robbers from Outer Space, take the profits from it, and make the Billy Sunday story. And then, thereafter, we would produce only Bible pictures or religious films.
Bill had died, and so he had this footage that was never used before. And when he showed it to Reynolds, his landlord, he naturally, Reynolds thought, well, yeah, it sounds great.
He came to me very happy and surprised and delighted. He says, I'm going to make my first film, and I would like for you to be the young leading man. And I said, oh, what's the film about? He said, well, it's going to be Bela Lugosi's last film. But I said, but he's dead. He said, oh, well, we have a lot of footage that was taken before he died, and there's been a script written around this existing footage by a very clever, very unique writer-director named Ed Wood, and I'd like for you to meet him.
I believe it was Hope Lugosi told me that my father had died, and I just handed the telephone to my mother because I was very upset about it. It was a long time before I could get over the immediate grief. At the funeral parlor, the people who ran it were the friends of the family, and it was the decision of my mother and I that he would be buried in his cape.
Some of the big wigs that remembered him as a box office attraction came to the funeral, and I wasn't a pallbearer, but some of the biggest people in the business did carry his body to the grave.
Doesn't Dracula ever end for you? No. Dracula never ends. I don't know whether I shall call it a fortune or a cause, but it never ends.
Tomb of the Vampire. That's what the footage was made for. And Lugosi died, so there it was, just a couple of feet of film. So Eddie said, let's make a movie.
The Grave Robbers from Outer Space. He was really excited because he managed to get all his favorite actors in this particular film. You know what I mean? Like Lugosi and Tor Johnson, and Tom Keene and Lowell Talbot.
I just don't think that Eddie had any great talents, honestly, other than getting people together who would work for him. And I would say that most of them worked because they needed the job.
You believe there are such things as flying saucers, Colonel?
Yes, sir.
You've seen them?
Yes, sir.
You realize there's a government directive stating that there is no such thing as a flying saucer?
Yes, sir.
You stand by your statement that you've seen flying saucers?
He liked names because he figured if I'd use a name that's been forgotten over many years, like Bela Lugosi, Lyle Talbot, or the rest of them, this will up my pictures. It was true.
But the thing that always killed me was that Bela died, I think while we were making it, because they replaced him with a guy who was his size, and Eddie shot him from the rear from then on the rest of the film. But I think he died during the time we were shooting that film.
Well, by late 1956, I was already not working and desperately poor, trying to live on $13 a week unemployment compensation. And a little man came to my door. I did know him slightly, Paul Marco, and he said, "I got a script for you, and it's called Grave Robbers from Outer Space." Well, nobody was offering me any scripts of any kind, and anything that would offer me more than this $13 to help embellish it a little sounded great. But then he told me it was Edward D. Wood, and I said, no.
A few days later, we went to La Cienega, had dinner or lunch at the Tail of the Cock. And in walked Ed Wood, charming man. He had this nice little thin mustache, looked a lot like Earl Flynn. And to look at him, he was very impressive. And he immediately began to tell me how great I would be in the role and how terrific I would be. And then he handed me a screenplay and asked me to read it.
But the title is interesting, Grave Robbers from Outer Space. And then he pulled out a wad of fat wad of bills. It was 200 $1 bills. He said, "This is a union film, and this is for you, if you want to do the picture." And I said, "Okay, sounds good."
So I took it home, and I read the most abysmal piece of screenplay writing I had ever read in my life. I thought a 7-year-old child could write better dialogue than this.
So what if we do develop this solanite bomb? We'd be even a stronger nation than now.
Stronger. You see? You see? Your stupid minds. Stupid. Stupid.
That's all I'm taking from you.
Get back here, you jerk!
And then I looked at the script and was about to rehearse with myself. Oh, I was unable to say the words. They wouldn't even come out. I was so offended by the dialogue. So when Paul Marco came back, I said, "I'm sorry, can I do this mutely like a vampire who's in a trance, just sort of zombie-like?" Just whatever you say, we're using your name, okay. So that's why I did it silently.
And so I tried to discourage Reynolds from getting into this picture-making plan, but he was carried away with it. He wanted to be the man who produced Bela Lugosi's last picture, and I couldn't talk him out of it.
There were no chauffeured limousines or anything, and I don't drive, so the studio was not too far away down Santa Monica Boulevard, so I got into full costume at home, which was my wont, and makeup. And in the mid-50s, that was a little strange, because we didn't have Melrose Avenue yet as we know it today. And so I was rather heavily pancaked in white and dragging black tatters. I got on the RTD and went to the studio. And the studio was on Santa Monica Boulevard, across the street from Sears Roebuck and behind a little old seedy hotel in an alley.
Actually, a house of prostitution. It was where all the Hollywood prostitutes lived in those days. And while I had not visited there myself, I was aware of it, you know.
Anyway, I accepted the role, and the first day on the set, I realized I had made a mistake. And the set was like a 7th grade high school play. There was these cardboard tombstones and full of earth and mounds of dirt against a black scrim, and it just seemed so amateurish. And on the set was all of Ed Wood's entourage, unusual people, interesting people. I kind of felt like I was in one of those old-time carnivals. It was just kind of a freaky, unusual, carny atmosphere, and I realized that I had made a mistake.
I look for the studio, and I finally find it behind this building, and it looks like an abandoned garage or something. I don't know, and this is a studio, you know.
We shot that behind the Harvey Hotel, a little studio, that the roof, believe it or not, was nothing more than burlap bags. It looked like an elongated garage. In fact, the cemetery sequence in Plan 9 from Outer Space was shot there. Although it looks like a deep cemetery, that thing is only 3 feet deep by about 40 feet wide, long.
The last scene of the film was the cockpit scene. And I came on the set, you know, a little ahead of time. I always try to get a feel, get the choreography of what it's going to look like and be like. And so I asked Ed, where's the cockpit? He says, we're constructing it. And so I thought it was probably off stage somewhere. And in about 45 minutes, 2 carpenters came in with 2 masonite boards and proceeded to bend them together and kind of tack them down in some way so that they were held to the floor. And they brought in some kind of a backing, and then they drug in some of the electronic equipment that was used in the spaceship. And it was so amateurish looking that the poor cameraman just shook his head, and what he attempted to do was put us in fuzzy focus so that you couldn't really see the set.
You got me that time, Mac. This American Flight 812 requesting...
World.
That's nothing from this world.
Burbank Tower to American Flight 812. Are you in trouble? Are you in trouble?
Mayday, Mayday. Stand by, Burbank Tower.
You suppose a passenger saw it?
I doubt it. Most of them are asleep. But it was quite a jolt, Jeff. I'll check.
Good. We'll get it ready for landing. And keep it quiet until we get instructions.
Right.
Okay, Danny.
American Flight 812, reporting to Burbank Tower. Over.
We contacted government officials. They refuse our existence.
What plan will you follow now?
Plan 9. It's been absolutely impossible to work through these Earth creatures. Their soul is too controlled.
Plan 9. Ah, yes. Plan 9 deals with the resurrection of the dead. Long-distance electrode shot into the pineal and pituitary glands of recent dead. Have you attempted any of this plan as yet?
Yes, Excellency.
How successful has it been?
We have risen 2 so far. We shall be just as successful on more.
At the time of the Martians and all this, I had these things laid out. All these particular Martian heads, costume, and all this, to make them look genuine or different. He turned to me, he says, we don't have the time. I says, that audience wants to see something different. They want to see space people, and they had to be different. Well, he said no again, and then I got mad. I got pretty mad. I started to walk off, but I said, no, I can't do this.
Of the Wood people, my darling was Mr. Criswell. I just adored him.
Greetings, my friend. We are all interested in the future, for that is where you and I are going to spend the rest of our lives. And remember, my friend, future events such as these will affect you in the future. You are interested in the unknown, the mysterious, the unexplainable. That is why you are here.
I was connected with Criswell of Criswell's Predicts. He was in about 300 papers. He was on, I think, about 10 or 11 times a week, local television. And he saw the things of a mystic, you know.
He was the only one with whom I really associated personally. And I want to tell you how I met him. I was doing a show, vampire show at Channel 9, and for 2 days before the show I would fast. And then at midnight I was let out of KBC Studios on Vine Street, ravenous, in full costume and ravenous. So I would run across the street to the Hollywood Ranch Market and get a chili dog. And there I was one night ordering my chili dog, and this beautiful gentleman, tall, in a dark blue suit with silver hair and a spit curl in the middle of his forehead, said, "You're Miss Vampira." I said, that's not your problem. And he introduced himself. He said, "I'm Criswell. I have a friend who would like to meet you." And he said, "It's Mae West." I said, "She's already met me. She fired me from the Mae West show." Catherine was great. So he told me that she was a fan of mine. She watched me on TV, and that she was a friend of his. And that's the way that I met him. And ultimately, she took to sending food for me and him with her chauffeur in the limousine. She'd call him up and say, "I've got some Swedish meatballs or something," and she'd send them over to him, and then he would call me. I'd walk over, since I lived nearby, and share the food. Her own cooking. Her own cooking.
My friend, we cannot keep this a secret any longer. Let us punish the guilty. Let us reward the innocent. My friend, can your heart stand the shocking facts about grave robbers from outer space?
Plan 9 was premiered at the Carlton Theater down on Western, Southwestern. And I was taken there to, I was in full costume, and they had me backstage. I was eager to see the film, but they said, "No, you wait in the wings here backstage, and when we tell you, you'll cross stage left." And so I did, and as I walked out, a large audience started booing and hissing and sending out jocular catcalls. I mean, really lots of noise. And they got me at the other end of the stage and said, "Now wait. You're going to go back the other way." And I was timed, and I was told to go back. And every time I went back, the cat calls just got louder and louder, hooting and hollering. Well, then they explained to me, the people backstage, that every time the big character was appearing on screen, the little three-dimensional one was just strutting across the stage, and it looked so funny to the folks in the audience. So then I said, "Well, how am I going to see this movie?" They said, "In a moment, you go and sit up in the balcony, then you can watch." So ultimately, they released me. I went to sit in the balcony, but I wasn't on the screen. And just as I was going to appear on the screen, they said, "Come on now, you have to go and do the Joe Pine show." Goodbye, I was gone. So I never saw it until 1980.
Ed was in the height of his glory at the premiere showing. He was exuberant. He was happy. He introduced the characters. He introduced Mrs. Lugosi. I think he introduced all of them but me.
People turning south from the freeway were startled when they saw 3 flying saucers high over Hollywood Boulevard. A woman, startled by the sight in the sky, telephones the police.
And I remember one day someone questioned him about some continuity in the script, and Ed said, "I know my script, I know my script." And I laughed to myself, and I said, "Well, I'm glad you do, because I don't know what's going on."
Our scene was all one take because they didn't have the money or the film to do it over. And the curtain scene was very funny. A lot of people have mentioned that and laughed about it.
There's nothing wrong between you two.
Oh, no, nothing like that. Just that I'm worried, she being there alone and those strange things flying over the house, and those incidents in the graveyard these past few days just got me worried.
Well, maybe they haven't figured out those crazy skybirds yet, but I'd give you 50-to-1 odds the police have cleared up that cemetery thing by now.
I hope so.
The 2 pilots and I went over to the corner and wrote our own script, you know, because we just didn't like the way he wrote that. And sometimes he didn't write it the way that people talk.
Hey, Edie, how about you and me balling it up in Albuquerque?
Albuquerque, have you read that flight schedule, boy?
What about it?
We land in Albuquerque at 4 a.m. That's strictly a 9 o'clock town.
Anyway, we shot it in 3 days, and at least I can say that it was a very unique, interesting experience.
The film was made, and now the problem of getting the money from it that was to be used in making the Billy Sunday story. A meeting was called, and each of us who had contributed to the budget of the film was given a small part of what we'd put in back as somewhat, we thought, somewhat of an effort to pacify us. We could not find the film. We did not know where it went. We did not know who bought it, as he said. His wife said she did not know anything about where it went. We couldn't find it, and so every person in it, every person that gave to the budget, got back that little pittance that he gave us that day, and that was all. But one day, a lady called and said that there was a movie showing in Lubbock, Texas, and that it was called Plan 9 from Outer Space, and that I was in it. Well, I said it couldn't be me, because the movie I was in was called Grave Robbers from Outer Space. But I inquired and found out that the name had been changed. I am confident that the report that the Baptists insisted on the changing of the name of Grave Robbers from Outer Space is an error. I never heard anything about it. Everyone that I knew was surprised when we learned that it had been changed.
Tor, I and his wife and all, we had dinner one time at his house, and he says, "Little fellow, eat up, eat up." So these people, I think food was the most important thing in their life, because it was just gobs of turkeys and chickens and all this, and I was stuffed up to my esophagus. My scapulas were filled. Anyway, he says, "Eat, eat, eat. Little Tor, I'll make you Little Tor." I says, "No, I don't want to be Little Tor." But fortunately, the dogs were outside barking. I says, "What's that?" He says, "There's a dog. My dog's outside." Fortunately, they got under the table when this long tablecloth covered them. And every time they'd put a half a chicken or another piece of roast beef on my plate, I would pretend I was eating it with one hand and taking the meat and giving it to the dog under the table to help me out. The dogs kind of saved my life. Then when it was all over, he says, "We're going to have a little dessert, Little Tor." Call me Little Tor. The men were half a melons, whole half a melons. I couldn't put anything in my gullet. He took the sheet, wrapped it around like a diaper, crawled up in the corner, and slept. Everybody slept. The wife, Greta, and Carl Jr. At that time, it was my exit. I wrote a note thanking him and snuck out of the door. Home, and I think I took 2 or 3 cathartics.
Your daily newspapers, radio, and television dares to relate the latest in juvenile delinquency. At times, it seems, juvenile delinquency is a major problem of our law enforcement officers. The National Safety Council keeps accurate records on highway fatalities. They can even predict how many deaths will come from a drunken holiday weekend.
I met Ed Wood through one of his stock players, Kenny Duncan, who was a very close friend of mine. I kind of hero worshipped Kenny when I was a boy. Kenny was in all the old B-westerns and serials. He was a first-class villain. In fact, Gene Autry called him the meanest man in movies. Well, Kenny was on his way down, and Ed gave him a lot of work. He starred in The Sinister Urge and played one of Lyle Talbot's henchmen with Bud Osborne in Crossroad Avenger, and he starred as a Swami in Night of the Ghouls.
It's good to see you're all right. We were disturbed. You might have become lost in our corridors.
It became stuck in the chamber, and I wanted a breath of fresh air. Then I couldn't find my way back to the chamber, or back to the outside either, for that matter.
I wonder why you really went into the corridors.
I just told you.
Sure you did.
Now, what's this all about?
It is my suggestion you don't struggle too violently.
When Kenny died, he gave me this outfit. You know, this is a Kenny Duncan hat and a Kenny Duncan shirt and a Kenny Duncan vest, and he wore them in a lot of his movies. And I didn't really get to know Ed until after Kenny passed on. And somehow Ed got my phone number and he called me up, and he said he was having a wake for Kenny over at his house in North Hollywood, and he invited me. And that's where I met the Ed Wood stock players. And Ed and Kathy and I became quite close after that. And I would visit Eddie wherever he lived at least once a week for the rest of his life.
Well, Ed and I never got a divorce. I think that's because we still cared about each other, even though we couldn't really find our life together. But I really think that we would have gotten along very well if it hadn't been for that one thing. After about 5 years, he started drinking, and he asked my mother anyway, and she said, "No, Ed, there's no way that you two could get together because you lead two different kind of lives."
The third place and the final place that Ed moved to was, a real flea trap in Hollywood on Yucca and Cahuenga. And that place was terrible. I mean, they had drug dealers in there. They had prostitutes. A lot of people had dogs. At least Eddie took his dogs out back when they had to do their duty. But the other dogs, you'd walk down the hall to Eddie's apartment, and there'd be dog stuff in the hall. Well, Eddie, he was going downhill. He was hitting the bottle quite hard, and so was Kathy. They weren't getting enough nourishment, and they were both skin and bones.
If I had it to do over again, I would try to find some way to get him cured from drinking.
So I know that within him, deep within him, was a desire to climb a little higher as a man and in his spiritual existence. Whether he ever attained his goal, I do not know.
And then he wrote a screenplay in 3 parts. The theme of it was Life Goes On, and he actually wanted me to star in it. And the first part, I would have been a young man, the second part, a middle-aged man, and the third part, an old man. And he brought Harry Thomas, his makeup man, over to see if he could make me up. And Harry said, yeah. But he couldn't get any financing for it, you know, because, well, there weren't too many times when he was sober anymore, unfortunately.
Ed was to the point of being almost impossible. He would call incoherent with his conversations at 2 in the morning. I'm coming back, I'm making a picture, you're gonna be with me. I wouldn't make a picture without you, buddy.
Even then, he was going downhill, drinking too much, and losing everything he had, all of his creativity, his talent. The alcohol was getting to him very badly. And he just came, when I left him in 70, I sold the bar, and I went on. I didn't see him, you know, and when I left him in 70, he was on his way to really being wiped out, totally.
And he's helped so many people in Hollywood. I mean, gave many opportunities and, you know, upcoming actors. And I thought they would come to his rescue, or, you know, some of the old-timers.
I had no idea that Eddie was in bad straits. All I had heard that he had married Kathy, and that he had a nice woman, a good marriage. But I had no idea that they had lost their home at one point and that he was thrown out of his apartment. I would have pitched in and helped any way that I could have.
At the end, they were evicted from the apartment from Yucca, non-payment of rent. They couldn't keep up the rent payments.
Someone did come by and help them. Of all people was Peter Coe, the man who originally, worked at Universal Pictures back in the early 40s and 50s. He was pretty close to Ed Wood also, and he came there and he helped out. In fact, he brought him to his place to stay with him in North Hollywood, and this is where Ed died, at his home.
He was watching football. I don't think he was a football fan. And he just had a heart attack and he died. And poor Kathy, she was devastated because she really loved the man.
What good is a dream, a plan, or a scheme? That rainbow that you pursue, it's everything or it's nothing without someone to tell it to. How eager you are to get to that star, but after the journey's through, you're only a lonely dreamer without someone to tell it to. There'll be blue days, hard to get through days, days when you just want to die. You grow older, life's suddenly colder. If there's no shoulder to cry on, those castles in air are empty and bare, with no one to share the view. And moonlight is only moonlight. There's no magic in I love you without someone to tell it to. It kind of sums up my relationship with Eddie, and I'm very sad that I didn't see more of him when I came back from New York.
The bell has rung upon his great career. Now we lay him to rest. A rest well deserved, but so premature.
And now we return to our graves, the old and the new. And you may join us soon.
They gave a eulogy, and I guess everybody got drunk after.
He was a man that had all this boundless enthusiasm and energy, but he didn't know how to direct it.
To me, Ed Wood was kind of like a junk collector who would walk along the street and pick up things that was discarded, like a bumper that had fallen off, or a rusty fender, or a transmission that had fallen out of the car. He'd gather all this junk together, and then he would put it on a pile, stick it on a pile, and would not even bother to torch it together with a torch. He would just kind of hang there with spit and a dream, and then he would declare, "This is my work."
He wanted to be recognized as a filmmaker. He didn't care if they were masterpieces or low-budget films. He just wanted to be recognized as a filmmaker, and unfortunately, he wasn't until after he died.
I wish this acclaim had come sooner when he could have got some benefit out of it. He never had a chance. Life just didn't deal him a fair hand.
I'm coming.